Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here today again. My name is, welcome to our Careers in Peacebuilding Talk Story Series. My name is Jose Barzola from the Makanaonalani Institute for Peace here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Our talk story today is on the right words can teach peace and change the world with Dorinda Makanaonalani Nicholson. And today's event will be moderated by our good friend, Dr. Jenn Sagon-Taeza. Thank you for joining us today to learn about the journey into the profession. Our event today is co-sponsored by Real Innovative Connections. Real stands for Relevance of Education and Life, Design, Innovative Virtual on-site curricula that connect real world and classroom experiences. These experiences encourage participants to connect, reflect, and apply their knowledge. You can definitely learn more about them at realinnovativeconnections.org. I'll add their link in the chat too. Thank you so much for joining us to learn about Dorinda Nicholson, who will share her child survivor Pearl Harbor attack story from World War II in her World War II award-winning books. It is her mission to teach the love of reading to kids to open their minds so that the right words can widen their hearts. Dorinda is an award-winning World War II author, speaker who has been featured on CBS Sunday Morning News, USA Today, People Magazine, Asahi TV, Channel 1, NBC TV News, and several Smithsonian History Day events. Currently, she is a licensed mental health volunteer for the American Red Cross service to armed forces. Dorinda loves cats, to do the hula, and collect baseball cards. You can definitely learn more about her work as well at pearlharborchild.com, and I'll add that to the chat a little bit later as well. Jenn Sagon-Taeza is founder and executive director of Real Innovative Connection. Jenn holds a doctorate in educational leadership, specializing in curriculum instruction and assessment. It's created many innovative educational programs geared toward the history of Hawaii, World War II, and the Pacific, and peace education. These educational programs have supported youth educators and lifelong learners. Jenn is also the co-founder of Heiwa Library, it's a peace library, just in case it's a Japanese word, a digital library sharing the stories of peace, humanities, and cultural awareness. Heiwa Library is a global collaboration with volunteers and educators who share their love for literacy. I will add the link to that in the chat as well. And it is an open source. It's an opportunity for people to kind of share basically that literature as it relates to peace, humanities, and culture. But to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jenn.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having us. I am pleased to introduce Dorinda Nicholson. We've been working together with many school visits, sharing her amazing story as the 6-year-old girl who had survived and witnessed the story of Pearl Harbor. And so I'd like to turn it over to Auntie Dorinda as she shares her story of a 6-year-old girl who witnessed the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Aloha, aloha kako, everyone. That was the most impressive introduction that I wrote for Jose and Jenn. I am honored to be here and honored to be invited anytime that I can share a time in history that I lived through. And then this time in history where the world is at war with each other in so many different places. And this came not quickly, or it came easily, I would say, once I realized that I had an obligation and I carry this story. And because this is an event that took place, it'll be 81 years next month. So, you can kind of start doing the math and figure out that I was 6 years old at the time, living with my baby brother and my mom and dad. And those of you who are familiar with Pearl Harbor, and those of you who are not, let me set up how the harbor is. The Navy acquired Pearl Harbor a number of years ago, and it was important at the time of World War II, 1941 and on, and it still is today. It's a strategic location for our armed forces that watch all of the Pacific Ocean. So at that time, the Navy had taken over the harbor, and the battleships were there. There was a submarine base in the middle of the harbor, a small island called Ford Island. And Ford Island was a natural takeoff and landing strip for our American fighters, pilots. We weren't at war at that time. So to do their practicing in case he would go to war. And on December 7th, the date that President Roosevelt said would live in infamy, the Empire of Japan sent 6 long, dark, sleek submarines and bringing with them cradled, I said submarines. Oh, I'm glad I heard that. They were not submarines, they were aircraft carriers, so that they could carry these 300 and some airplanes to Hawaii. Also in the harbor is a peninsula called Pearl City Peninsula. It's still there, but at the time my family was growing up, it was homes. My mother taught hula. We were civilians, and the Navy had just built around us. Pan American World Airways was in one of the locks, LOCH, and they put their airplanes, their seaplanes, because if you flew to Hawaii, you landed on the water in Pearl Harbor. That's where Mom worked, and that's why we were there. Mom could walk to work. So on that Sunday morning, we have a front row seat. The airplanes coming over, the pilots coming in so low, you could see the goggles on their eyes, covering their eyes, because they wanted our aircraft carriers, and they wanted the battleships, and they wanted to paralyze our fleet so that Japan could continue their power and their love of power to invade more countries. They had already been into Korea and into Manchuria and had wanted to expand. And at that very same time, actually 2 years earlier, in 1939, Hitler was doing the same thing, wanting, with his demand for more land, similar to what you're seeing on the news today with Russia and Ukraine. Hitler is going in and taking over countries. United States stays out of the war. We just finished World War I about 17 years earlier. And with the bombing and the attack by Japan on Pearl Harbor, an American base, that brings us into World War II. And so the men who are on the ship, or thousands of men, the battleships are kind of like when 9/11 happened. Some of you are even too young for that, but your teachers would remember 9/11, tall skyscrapers full of thousands of people. You can think of a battleship kind of similar to that. lots of different decks, and at least 1,000 to 2,000 men on those. So those men, again, going back is 81 years, in almost exactly a month from today. These men are in their hundreds now. So those of us who were children, and especially I think of myself being a child of the harbor, I have that obligation, write this history down and share it with you, and look at the parts that I can share and tell you what it's like to be a child, an American child. In fact, oftentimes, if no one knows who I am, I'll say, guess what country I'm from? I carried a gas mask. I watched my country be bombed. I had blackouts at night. I had invasion money, special kind of money that you had to use. My playground at school had the bomb shelters on them. And we would have practices a lot going into the bomb shelters. My mom and dad had a bomb shelter right by the office that they worked in. And the mail was all censored in or out of my country. So what country am I from? And with just that information, you wouldn't guess that I was an American child, but I was a child of Hawaiian ancestry living in the Hawaiian Islands. And so I continue to share this story while I can. And today our focus is on the use of words and how, and of course we're sponsored by the Matsunaga Peace Institute. How can we use words to learn about peace and to foster peace, to invite peace, and using the right words to keep peace going between ourselves and those that we do come in contact with. So I am here to answer any questions on those particular topics of peace and words, or on the World War II, more details in the history. So between Jose and Dr. Jenn, and I probably won't be able to see the chat, but I'll rely on them if a hand goes up or if there's a question in chat for me to answer.
Auntie, while we're waiting for our questions to come in, can you also talk about that friendship that you had? You had I know you had shared with one of our school groups about a very special friendship that you had. And that also ties into our theme for today, as far as using those beautiful words of peace. If you could just share your story.
Are you especially talking about Pilot Abe, or really very recent with Hiroshima?
Actually, you know what? That the story about Pilot Abe would be great as well. Yes.
Oh, I love to tell this story. As a part of my writing, my story, I started writing my story about 20 years ago. So there were quite a few of the Pearl Harbor military survivors. And so one of them, a tall, had a white kind of a handlebar mustache and white hair, real tall. And his name was Richard Fisk. And he came to me saying that he wanted to tell me his story. What a gift. What a gift if you take someone else's story and if you gift them with yours. You all have stories. The story that he told me was this. Richard was one of the youngest. He'd lied about his age, so he was barely 19 and had already been in the service a couple of years. And he was a bugler. And the bugler's job, and you're probably familiar with taps, because you hear those at military funeral services. And then that particular morning, he used to blow what's called reveille. That's da 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 da. So he says he's on the West Virginia. The West Virginia is one of the battleships in the harbor that morning. And at 8 o'clock, the men all get up from under their bunks and they come up to the top deck and they salute the flag because it goes up at 8 o'clock. So Richard is up in the middle of the part of the structure of the West Virginia, getting ready to blow reveille for the men to get up. So it's about 7:45, 8:50, and that's when the bombs start dropping and the attack starts happening in Pearl Harbor. So he sees a plane coming towards him. It's flying very, very low, and so low that it makes him angry because he doesn't, we had been told no way could Japan come 4,000 miles, and we'd been watching them and been expecting something to happen, but they couldn't come 4,000 miles and we not see them and bring airplanes, but they did. And so what Richard is seeing is a Japanese plane. It's a torpedo bomber, only about 20 or 30 feet above the water. But his brain says, how dare that American pilot come in here so low like that? I'll have him court-martialed. And he starts to try to find the number. Every time drops a torpedo, because it's only 20 or 30 feet above the water, goes into the water and speeds into the side of the West Virginia, and Richard feels the impact. And then when he looks at the airplane, he sees the pilot. That's when his nightmares begin, and that's when his hatred began. The captain of the ship, Captain Benyon, orders the men to abandon ship. They end up taking 6 torpedoes. She's sinking. So Richard has to jump into the water. It's burning. There's piles of burning oil, and he has to avoid those. And that island that I told you about, a Ford Island that's in the center, he swims there into safety. So he does not mind going to fight in Iwo Jima, one of the bloodiest battles between America and Japan. Thousands are killed that day. And the war is finally over, and he goes to see his doctor, has many surgeries, has another one, and he wakes up in the recovery room and the doctor says, okay, Sarge, you ready to tell me what's eating at you? Because there's no more that I could really do with surgery. And so that's when Richard tells me he had to tell that here's this big Marine who has nightmares, who hates, and it was killing him, and he wants to live. And he tells the doctor Then he decides he's going to go to the Arizona Memorial. He's going to take a scrapbook of friendship and peace. And at one of the reunions, about 25, 30 years ago, here comes some Japanese summer pilots, one in particular that has war wounds also. And he and Richard meet, they become friends, they apologize to each other. His name is Zenji Abe. Zenji Abe even goes on television, apologizes to America, because he says, when I came in to drop my bombs, nobody is fighting back at me, and I don't fight that way. The warning that you were to have gotten didn't get through in time, and I'm so sorry. And so he and Richard become friends and make this friendship ceremony with each other. Mr. Abe says, Richard-san, if I give you some money, would you buy 2 red roses, one for you and all who died here at Pearl Harbor? One is for me and for all who died in Japan. Take your bugle once a month out to the Arizona. The 2 roses, tie them in front of the memorial wall, and then blow taps. Richard did that every Sunday for 12 years. That's 144 times. His bugle is silent, both the men are gone, but the example, the words, Mr. Abe says, I am so sorry. Richard-san, I am so sorry. Let's become friends. And so that story continues to be shared because of those like you who want to know more and come and hear and take in these stories, and especially the story of Richard Fisk and Zenji Abe. Certainly warriors of not fighting anymore, but warriors for peace.
Thank you, Auntie. I think we have a question. Is it okay for us to go to a question?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. All right. The question comes from Jessica, and her question is, can you share your experience that day with us? Where you were, who you were with, how you felt, and the days following that, if you're comfortable sharing.
Okay, that'll take us till about 5:30. So I will do the Reader's Digest version, and I tend to talk slow. To take you to that morning, I've already positioned, I think you have my position of, I can see the harbor from my front porch, and I used to ride my bike down there and go crabbing. They have really good salmon crabs. So I'm used to hearing airplanes coming over. We did not have an Air Force at that time. The Navy had the pilots, and they would practice. They would, have a red plane with red markings and a plane with blue markings. So, but not on Sundays. And so Sunday morning, we're getting ready to go to church. Sunday school starts at 9, 7:30, mom's in the kitchen, and we hear airplanes going over. My dad comes in, says, what, so many men? And remember how Richard was like, and then those of you old enough for 9/11, just think about all of us at 9/11. We're thinking pilot error. when the first plane goes in, of course, by the time the second plane goes in, this is not a typical morning. Neither is December 7th. So airplanes start coming over our house. That's why my brother wakes up in his crib. My dad, says, "What? Airplanes on a Sunday morning?" And the men in the harbor are seeing airplanes and not thinking hardly anything about it. And we were suspicious and worried about the Japanese who lived in Hawaii at that time. A third of the population is Japanese. And so the airplanes were taken off of the runways and they were locked up in the hangars. And then even the guns were locked up because we didn't want there to be any kind of spies and that were able to get to any of our equipment. So it took a while to get our guns loaded and in position to aim back at the surprise attack. While the men in the harbor are doing that, my dad takes my baby brother and myself and puts us in the car, and we are driving away from the bombing. And we go up to the hills above Pearl Harbor and we watch from up there. And we can look down and what we see is oily black smoke that just disappears up into the clouds. And then you would see flashes of red. That would be the live fire as something else on another deck catches on fire. So, my mom and dad are in their 20s, and my dad is from the Kansas City area. So I'm sure he's worried about what's going to happen here in Hawaii and away from his family. And whereas those of us who are kids, we just ran and played in the harbor. That afternoon, our governor comes on the air and announces that we are under martial law. And so that's when blackout start that very night. Nobody out of your house after dark. Strict curfews. We are taken to a sugar plantation recreation hall in Waipahu, which is next to Pearl City. And the people in Waipahu bring us pillows and blankets and feed us because it's too dangerous for us to be close to our houses. My dad goes to work the next day. He works in the post office, and they start putting together what the rules are going to be for the mail, and we're going to censor it in or out of Hawaii. And then all the planning for the gas mask. You must carry it with you everywhere. No school. School started up in February. And all the restrictions, Hawaii depends on ships then and now to bring us the goods that have to come from someplace else in the world. So we knew that we're going to have to grow our own food. Luckily, Hawaii grows fruits and vegetables easy, and you can go to the ocean, but to not expect anything to be coming in by ship. And then just the fear, we lived with the fear of an invasion and when the Japanese would come back. So one of the first things my dad did was take all our American bills, $1, $5, $10 to the bank. And then the bank marked them. They gave them back what they gave back to you already had Hawaii in large letters on one side and then on smaller bold on the back side, and that was the money. I used to go without my milk at lunchtime and school break, and I would take my milk money and buy savings bond stamps. And you would put those in a book. And when you filled up your book, you took it to the post office and you got a savings bond. And that was the way kids could help. And we started rationing, or when the rationing started, we'd collect tires. We took our mom's pots and pans to school. Some of the times we had permission. Again, we thought our pot was going to make the winning bullet of the war. And really hard at night to sit in the dark, but it's wartime. Any other questions? What ideas do you have for creating peace among your friends and your family? Any of you have ideas?
So just to jump in briefly, Dorinda, thank you so much. To answer your question, I personally like to just explore time to be able to spend time together, because I feel like there's so many things that are placed on our schedules on a daily, weekly, monthly basis that just you need to make the time. It's like the weekends, this specific time is, not just end of the day. Yes, I think one thing that we do in my household is we just make sure that we have dinner together. We all sit around the table and just catch up on the day on a daily basis. But it is really the weekends when we can like truly, get beyond the routine of like, oh, it's shower time, it's bedtime, that kind of stuff. Get to experience something together. That's the memories
Yeah.
that I think that's
Or
truly.
something for someone else. Nice.
Yeah,
Or
I
just
mean,
even
it's
smile.
about
bit.
it's about the memories, really, and I think that's really where the peace comes from. To me, it's about the relationship building. But yeah, I don't know if Jen has something.
For myself, to actually build on what you were saying, gap time is very important. My kids are a bit older than yours, and so I know a lot of times it's for me and my kids, it's communication, and it's really listening to our perspectives and being open to everyone's perspectives, knowing that we all have our own personal opinions and we all have our ideals in certain topics, but to be respectful at the same time and just to be open to communicating and really sharing out our own ideas. And so I've always stressed out the whole communication with technology being one of the main focuses in today's, like having all these different social medias and even our phones and in certain things like that. Technology has been really big. And so we do stress in my household that communication comes first, and technology is a great tool, but it's also a way for us to kind of, communicate, yes, but then it also takes that away from us. So we just try to make that balance, the healthy balance between the whole technology, but we do spend a lot of time communicating as a family. I believe we have another question, if we do have time for that. Is that okay? All right, perfect. Okay, we have another question, and the question is, did the war change your perception of Japanese Americans, and how did you foster peace with those individuals during those times?
In Hawaii, and I can only speak for myself, Hawaii, our our friends and our neighbors, and my cousins had names like Miyamoto, and so they were different than those people that came on the airplanes. We really, those who were Kama'aina and natives of the islands, we did not see them differently. But one of my neighbors, who I write about in Pearl Harbor Child, lived just a couple of blocks away from me. And his story of December 7th is different than mine because he is Japanese. So every Sunday morning, the place that I told you that I like to go crabbing, he had a, those of you who are fishermen need to, the name of these, but they're like chairs up on stilts and they stay there. So, and they're out in the water. And so you wade out and almost swim out, and then you climb up on these chairs, and then you've got a great place to fish from. So they had two of them. And Thompson Izawa is 12 years old, and he's with his dad. So they do this every Sunday morning. And Thompson told me he heard the noise that sounds like the buzzing of bees, and the bees kept getting closer and closer and closer. And right in front of his eyes of where they're fishing, the planes come in, and the first of the naval vessels to get the bombs was the USS Utah, because that's where our aircraft carriers were supposed to be. They weren't there, by the way. We didn't think Hawaii could be attacked, so we had sent our aircraft carriers to the Philippines, to Midway, delivering supplies, and of course they were attacked that same morning. So his dad says, "Boy, go home, we in trouble," and pulls him by the ear. And Thompson gets on his bicycle and his dad runs alongside of him. By the time they get to the house, there's several families that are already at the father, who was born in Japan but had lived in Hawaii for a long, long, long time. So his English was very, very good. Well, remember I said my family got to go up into the sugarcane fields, and then we got to go to Waipahu. My Japanese neighbors, an army truck came and picked them up, took them up to where we were in the same harbor, the same hills. Waimanu is that area up there. And they had to sleep on the ground and in the truck. And it rains every night in Hawaii in the mountains. So that was the difference. And they never did get a few days away while the bullets and explosives were cleared up from there. The Japanese could not work near the harbor, or if they did, they had to wear a letter that said J on them. Does that sound a little bit like what went on, in Europe? You could not speak anything but English on the telephone. Oh, that day, we look at the way we live now, and I have this with me all the time, and all I think the rest of you do. We could not use the phones. The phones were for the military and for emergencies. You couldn't call and see if your auntie was okay or somebody else was okay. So people were listening in on the phones then to your conversations. Some of the Japanese were taken away that very, very day. And I know some who were not ever bothered. And I went to one of my high school reunions. I decided I'd collect everybody's Pearl Harbor story. So my Japanese classmates, I remember two of their stories. One was a student living in Waihiwa, and his father was a dentist. And he went to all of his Hawaiʻi patients and gave them some gifts, hoping that they would help him if he ever needed help. He never needed help, and he was okay. Another classmate, both his parents were doctors, and they were taken away that very day, put in a prison in Texas because they were considered leaders of the community, and left him alone. Just imagine the Army comes in and takes your mom and dad away, and you're like 8. What do you do? And he's still bitter for how it affected him. 3 years just doing for himself and depending on friends and neighbors to help him. And there are a lot more stories. Those are, I love to go to the Japanese Cultural Center near the university and look at the stories there. And then I love to contrast then the 442nd, which is made up entirely of Americans of Japanese ancestry. There's a picture of 200 of them in front of the Iolani Palace taking their oath to serve in the military. So think about those. Hawaii, as I said, is a little different than if you were in Oregon, Washington State, up there, and you are signing up to serve in the military that took your mom and dad and baby sister away. Lots of confusing times, sad stories, heroic stories. The 442nd still holds the record for the most decorated unit of its size in any army.
Thank you, Auntie. I know it's probably coming to a close, right? And so is there any inspirational words that you would like to share about your experience and just thinking of where we're at today?
Ask me that again on sharing personal experience. Ask me the full question again.
Auntie, we're coming to a close. So if you could share some inspirational words and going with our theme for today and our talk story session, if you could share with us some inspirational words as our closing.
Okay, all right. Well, I'd like to share with those of you who may or may not be from Hawaii a custom that we have in Hawaii called Ho'oponopono. Pono is a part of our creed for no, it's Uamauka ea oka aina ika pono, to make right. And the verb ho'o is to make right. And anytime there is a conflict between, and this started out with families, and then beyond that, that you come together and talk about what is hurting, what is still angry, what you need to be understood, and you keep asking the questions and you keep talking, and you can do it on your own with just the other person, or you could have someone with Hawaiian knowledge and culture to help you through it. And then it ends with, I am so sorry. I love you. And the other, and you may have to talk an hour or 2 hours. And when it's finally all done, I am sorry and I love you. If there was a way, and think of those words, just those words, I am sorry, how that feeling when we've had someone hurt us either unintentionally or intentionally, how important it is to hear that statement, those words of peace, I am so sorry. To expand that to countries, certainly words have made enemies of each other. And as a writer, I look for, and as a speaker, I look for words that will hopefully will touch your heart, will have you realize how valuable you are and that you are loved. And in the world that we're living in, and World War I, World War II, which is my era of how countries, I want another country, I want another, I want more, I want more, I want more, I guess these will be slaves for you. You get all of their gold and riches. And it's been from early history through my time of living. And my time was called before Pearl Harbor and after Pearl Harbor. Then during 9/11, the world kind of was before 9/11. And after 9/11, the world was this way. Those of you now who are just growing and coming into adulthood, your Pearl Harbor is COVID. How these are huge events and how they change us in ways of thinking, communication, dealing with each other, and some of our beliefs. Our beliefs manage our words, and our words do make a difference on how we do feel. So the words I always like to end with is there a way, think of this, we talk about the love of power, how countries have taken that and have used that as a way to kill, to take what's not theirs. We could change the love of power to the power of love. Those are the words that would instill peace within us and help us learn the vocabulary and the way to deliver our words that invite peace. And here we are at the early part of November as we go in to a time of Thanksgiving, and then to a time where the Prince of Peace will come. And so I leave with you that I hope you will invite a Prince of Peace into your homes, into your hearts, and that you will use the power of love. Aloha to all of you.
Thank you so much, Dorinda. It's just truly your kindness, your sweet, your ever-ending knowledge and care for sharing your story and allowing us to just learn further. As someone mentioned about being able to let go of generational, ethnic hatred and resentment, and just it's amazing. I think how you've having gone into the mental health field, and it's you've just persevered on. So thank you so much for all the. Appreciate you opening up about your experiences, the lessons learned, and tips that have come out of today's dialogue. Tips that hopefully, others in the audience and those that watch this recording later on can kind of take on as future peace builders. Thank you for your kindness and leadership in this field as we explore, our journey into the profession. Definitely thank you everyone who's joining us today as well. We appreciate your interest in support and joining us to learn about our careers in peace building talk story.